Sometimes the people we take in are the ones who change us the most. On a quiet farm, tucked away in the heart of America, a struggling single father opens his door to a lost woman with no past and no place to go. What he doesn't realize is, behind her tired eyes and quiet demeanor lies a connection to a hidden farming dynasty, and a choice that will reshape both their lives forever. This isn't just a story about second chances. It's about how kindness sows the seeds of something far greater than anyone could imagine, ready to discover how a simple act of compassion can unlock a world of hidden legacies and unexpected love. But before we dive in, if you believe in the power of good stories and second chances, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue sharing heartfelt tales that stay with you long after the last word. Now, let's begin. A struggling single dad took in a lost woman, only to uncover her ties to a hidden farming dynasty. The wind rolled across the flat plains like an old hymn, soft but persistent, carrying with it the scent of tilled earth and the faint promise of rain. Jonas Whitaker stood at the edge of his modest plot of land, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his worn hat. The fields stretched out before him in stubborn rows, quiet but demanding. He'd worked this soil all his life, and yet every year it felt like starting over. Behind him, the farmhouse leaned slightly to the left, paint peeling, its white boards weathered by time and storms. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to raise his daughter Maisie after the accident took his wife 4 years ago. Enough to keep food on their table, most days. Enough to keep him tethered when life had tried to sweep his feet out from under him. But lately, Jonas had begun to feel something gnawing at the edges. The loneliness of long nights, the relentless grind of making ends meet, the quiet ache of wondering if this was all life would ever be. He wiped his brow, glancing up at the grey clouds gathering in the distance. A storm was on its way. Just as he was about to head back to the house, something unusual caught his eye. A figure, small and hunched, walking along the dirt road by the edge of his property. Jonas squinted. Whoever it was, they didn't belong. People didn't usually wander these parts, not without a reason. And certainly not at dusk, with a storm brewing. He hesitated for a moment, then set down his tools and walked toward the fence line. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer. A woman, thin and ragged, her clothes clinging to her like remnants of another life. Her hair was matted, and her steps faltered as though she'd been walking for miles with no destination. Jonas felt something tug inside his chest. "Evening," he called gently, not wanting to startle her. The woman stopped, blinking at him as if seeing another human being for the first time in days. She looked worn down, not just physically, but in her eyes, like someone carrying too many burdens for too long. "Storm's coming," Jonas said, nodding toward the clouds. "You shouldn't be out here." She glanced up at the sky, then back at him, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Without pressing, he opened the gate and stepped closer, keeping his tone even. "I've got a dry porch, warm meal if you're needing one." For a heartbeat, she seemed to weigh whether to trust him. He could see the wariness in her eyes, a look he understood all too well. Life had taught both of them to be cautious. Finally, she gave a faint nod. Jonas motioned her toward the farmhouse, falling in step beside her but giving her space. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. Some people, he knew, had reasons they couldn't yet voice. Inside, Maisie was setting the table, her pigtails bouncing as she hummed to herself. She looked up when Jonas walked in, her bright eyes flickering curiously toward the stranger behind him. "This is a guest," Jonas said carefully, glancing at the woman. "Maisie, why don't you wash up and set out another plate?" he added. The woman lingered by the door, her posture stiff, eyes scanning the room like she wasn't sure she belonged. Jonas gestured toward a chair. "Sit," I'll get the kettle going." For a moment, she stood frozen, then finally eased into the chair, fingers tapping anxiously on the wood. Maisie peeked back into the room, smiling shyly. "Hi, I'm Maisie." The woman's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Hello." Jonas poured hot water over tea leaves, the silence between them stretching, but not uncomfortable. He knew better than to pry. As they ate, the woman kept her head down, saying little, but he noticed how she carefully watched every small kindness, the way Maisie passed her the butter without being asked, the way Jonas refilled her cup without a word, as if she wasn't used to people offering things freely. After dinner, Maisie skipped off to get ready for bed, leaving Jonas and the woman alone in the quiet kitchen. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, then leaned back against the counter. "You don't have to tell me anything if you're not ready," he said softly. "But if you need a place to rest, you're welcome to stay a night or two." She looked up at him then, really looked. There was something guarded but vulnerable in her eyes, a woman who had built walls so high she couldn't remember when they first went up. "My name's Evelyn," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Jonas gave a small nod. "Jonas." She hesitated, then added, I won't be any trouble." He offered a half smile. "Not worried about that." For a moment, they simply stood there, two people brought together by chance, or maybe something more. Outside, the wind rattled the old window panes. The storm would come, but for tonight, there was warmth inside these walls. And perhaps Jonas thought it wasn't just the fields that had been empty for too long. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains like liquid gold, casting soft shadows across the modest kitchen. Jonas Whitaker stood by the window, nursing a cup of coffee, his eyes drawn once again to the figure out by the barn. Evelyn Marlowe, though she hadn't yet shared her last name, was moving gingerly, awkward in the way city folk always seemed when faced with dirt, tools, and livestock. Yet there was a quiet determination in her movements, as if she wanted desperately to contribute, to pull her weight. He watched as she struggled to lift a bucket of feed, her thin arms trembling slightly. Jonas set down his mug. "You're up early," he said as he stepped outside, his boots crunching on the gravel. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Figured I should help. Don't want to freeload." Jonas gave her a soft chuckle. "Ain't no freeloading if you're willing to lend a hand." She looked at him skeptically, unsure whether to believe him. Jonas had seen that guarded look before, folks who'd been burned, who'd learned that kindness often came with strings attached. "I can show you how to handle that better," he offered, nodding to the bucket. For a split second she hesitated. Then, almost like an instinct buried too long, she nodded. They worked side by side, the morning filled with simple tasks, feeding the chickens, mending a loose fence post, checking the soil. Nothing extraordinary, but there was comfort in routine, in knowing exactly what needed doing. Jonas moved patiently, explaining as they went, never rushing her. He noticed the way Evelyn flinched at sudden noises, the way her eyes darted whenever a car passed on the distant road, like she feared something or someone might appear. Still, she listened intently, soaking in every instruction, as if it were more than just farm chores, as if learning how to steady a fence post or fix a latch somehow steadied something inside herself too. By mid-morning, Maisie came bounding out of the house, her pigtails flapping. "Daddy, can we fly the kite?" "Today," she called, waving a brightly colored bundle in her hands. Jonas glanced up at the sky. Clear, bright. The winds were favorable. He looked to Evelyn. "You ever flown a kite?" She shook her head, a shadow of something unreadable crossing her face. "No." Maisie's eyes widened. "You've never flown a kite? You gotta try. Daddy says the best kites are the ones you almost lose to the sky." Jonas grinned. She's not wrong. Evelyn glanced between them, lips twitching slightly, the faintest beginnings of a smile, something fragile and tentative. "Come on," Maisie tugged at her hand, all innocence. "You'll like it." Without another word, the three of them walked to the open field behind the barn. Jonas helped Maisie untangle the string, then handed the spool to Evelyn. The wind tugged at the fabric, and as Evelyn ran alongside Maisie, her laugh, small and surprised, escaped before she could stop. "It!" Jonas stood back, watching them, the image searing into his mind like sunlight after a long storm. He hadn't heard laughter like that in years. For a brief, shining moment, she looked like a woman unburdened, her dark hair whipping behind her, her face turned upward, chasing the wind, and then, as quickly as it came, the moment flickered and dimmed. Evelyn slowed, her eyes falling, and she handed the spool back to Maisie with a polite smile. Jonas didn't press. Some fences needed time to mend. Later that afternoon, after the chores wound down, Evelyn lingered by the old oak tree near the house. Jonas approached, wiping dirt from his hands. "You're quick to pick things up," he said casually. She shrugged, keeping her gaze on the horizon. "I've had to learn fast." He sensed there was more beneath those words. Whole stories left, unsaid, but he didn't pry. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of seeds. "Sunflowers," he said, offering them to her. "Maisie and I usually plant them out front. You're welcome to join." Evelyn hesitated before accepting the packet, her fingers brushing against his briefly. She turned it over in her hands like it was something delicate. "I don't know if I have much of a green thumb," she murmured. Jonas gave her a half smile. "Sunflowers don't need much. Just a bit of care, a place to grow, and they'll find the sun." Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary, the quiet between them carrying more weight than either spoke aloud. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field. Tomorrow there would be more work, more fences to mend, more seeds to sow. But for now, there was the stillness of the evening, the soft hum of something fragile beginning to take root, and neither of them knew yet just how much would grow. Evening had settled over the fields like an old quilt, stitched with hues of lavender and gold. Inside the Whitaker farmhouse, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something sweet. Maisie's half-finished attempt at baking cookies. Jonas sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee, the radio humming softly in the background. Across from him, Evelyn sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had volunteered to wash the dishes after dinner, though he'd told her she didn't have to. It was in her nature, it seemed, to repay kindness with action, even if it meant scrubbing plates until her knuckles turned red. Jonas had watched her all evening, noting the way she kept herself tucked in the corner of every room, never quite settling. She was polite, helpful, but always at arm's length, like a bird that had learned too many times how dangerous it was to land. Maisie, bless her heart, hadn't noticed. She chatted easily, showing Evelyn her school drawings and tugging her hand toward the window to point out constellations. But Jonas noticed. Now, as Maisie brushed her teeth in the other room, Jonas cleared his throat. "You've been a help. Around here. I appreciate it." Evelyn glanced up, her smile small but genuine. "It's nothing." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You planning to stay long?" She looked down, fingers fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "Just until I figure out what's next." Jonas nodded, not pushing further, but in the quiet between them, something hung heavy, something unspoken. Moments later, Maisie skipped back into the room, her face lit up. "Daddy, can we read? The story tonight? The one about the tree that keeps giving," Jonas smiled. "Of course." He stood, but before following Maisie to her room, he glanced once more at Evelyn. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said gently. "No rush." She offered a faint nod, but her eyes remained distant. Later that night, The house settled into silence. The wind outside whispered against the windows, rustling the branches of the old oak tree. Jonas lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of Maisie's soft breathing from the next room. He couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn was like one of those fences he'd spent a lifetime mending, strong in some places, broken in others. A woman running, not just from circumstance, but from herself. Suddenly a soft creak echoed down the hallway. Jonas rose quietly, stepping out of his room. The front door was slightly ajar, letting in the cool night air. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard. There she was, Evelyn, standing by the fence line, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the moonlit fields. He walked down the steps, careful not to startle her. "You all right?" His voice was low, laced with genuine concern. She glanced over, visibly tense but trying to mask it. "Sorry, I couldn't sleep." Jonas leaned against the fence beside her, giving her space. "Some nights are like that." For a while neither spoke. The crickets filled the silence, the stars sprawling endlessly above. Finally, Evelyn let out a breath, voice barely above a whisper. "It's peaceful here." He nodded. Quiet has a way of forcing things to the surface. She glanced at him, something fragile flickering in her eyes. Then, almost like an afterthought, she asked, "Have you ever felt like you don't belong anywhere?" Jonas felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the horizon, where the dark fields stretched beyond sight. "After my wife passed," he said finally, voice rougher than intended, "I felt like the world kept spinning, but I'd been thrown off." Evelyn's gaze softened, her fingers gripping the fence rail. "I stayed here because this land, these chores, Maisie, they anchored me, gave me a reason to keep going." He glanced sideways at her. "You don't have to tell me what you're running from, but sometimes staying put long enough helps you remember who you are." Evelyn swallowed hard, turning her face away. "It's not that simple." He nodded. "Rarely is." After another moment, she whispered, almost like a confession, "People expect things of you. They have plans, and when you can't live up to them, it's easier to disappear." Jonas said nothing, recognizing the weight behind those words, the exhaustion of always trying to fit into a mold someone else carved. The wind shifted, rustling the tall grass like an old lullaby. Without another word, Evelyn turned and walked, back toward the house, her figure folding into the shadows. Jonas lingered a moment longer, staring out over the fields. He didn't know her full story yet, but something told him. She wasn't the only one who'd been running. Morning came heavy with clouds, the scent of rain in the air. Jonas rose early, the familiar ache in his shoulders, the steady rhythm of another day calling. But when he stepped out to check the barn, something felt off. The tools he'd left stacked, neatly were scattered, and down by the fence, fresh footprints in the dirt led away, toward the road. Jonas's stomach dropped. Evelyn was gone. The morning sky hung heavy, a sheet of dull grey pressing low over the fields. Jonas stood by the fence line, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the road. The fresh footprints were still clear in the damp soil, trailing off toward nowhere. He hadn't slept after noticing them, had risen early, checked the barn, the tools, half hoping Evelyn had simply wandered down to the creek or needed a moment alone. But now, with each passing hour, the truth settled heavier on his chest. She was gone. Maisie came padding down the porch steps, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, where's Miss Evelyn?" Jonas swallowed, trying to keep his voice light. "She needed some air." Maisie tilted her head. "Will she be back?" He gave a quiet nod, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe. Inside, the house felt emptier than it had in weeks. Breakfast was quieter, even the old clock ticking on. The mantle seemed louder in the stillness. Jonas spent the afternoon mending a broken fence post out by the orchard. He swung the hammer rhythmically, each strike a futile attempt to quiet the gnawing unease. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered, thick on the horizon. The air smelled of approaching rain. That's when he saw her. Evelyn, standing near the edge of the property, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered against her face. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weight she carried had pressed her into herself. Jonas dropped the hammer without a word and walked toward her, heart pounding, not in anger but something else. Relief mixed with something softer, harder to name. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Instead, he simply stepped aside, opening the gate, giving her the choice. After a long pause, she walked past him, eyes downcast, her steps uncertain. They stood beneath the old apple tree, its branches bare now except for a few stubborn leaves clinging on against the season's change. The tree leaned slightly, one limb cracked but not yet broken, weathered but still standing. Jonas glanced at her, his voice quiet. "Had me worried." Evelyn wiped rain from her cheek, avoiding his gaze. "I'm sorry. I thought leaving would be easier." He didn't press, didn't ask where she'd gone. Instead, he gestured toward the apple tree. "This tree's older than I am. My wife used to sit under it in the summers reading to Maisie." His eyes softened as he spoke. "One year, a storm split it clean down the middle. I figured it was done for. No point trying to save it." Evelyn glanced at the tree, following his gaze. "But I left it alone," Jonas continued. "Didn't pull it up, didn't cut it down. Thought maybe it deserved a chance." He met her eyes then, steady and without judgment. "Next spring it bloomed twice as strong." Evelyn's lips parted slightly, as if to respond. But the words caught in her throat. Jonas took a step back. "You don't owe me explanations. But if you're tired of running, this place is big enough for people starting over." For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the orchard. Then softly she whispered, "I didn't mean to stay this long." He gave her a small, almost sad smile. "Most things worth keeping aren't part of the plan." They stood there, the distance between them finally shrinking, not with grand gestures, but with quiet understanding. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Jonas turned. "Come inside. You'll catch cold." Evelyn hesitated, then followed. Later that evening, the storm tapped gently against the windows. Jonas sat by the fireplace, whittling a small piece of wood, while Maisie sprawled on the floor, colouring. Evelyn moved around the kitchen, her steps lighter than before. She brewed tea without being asked, set extra logs by the hearth. It wasn't much, but it was something. When she finally sat down across from him, Jonas didn't break the silence. He let the warmth of the fire fill the space between them. Maisie looked up suddenly. "Miss Evelyn, want to help me plant flowers tomorrow? Daddy says the soil's ready." Evelyn glanced at Jonas, uncertainty flickering. He met her gaze. "She's been wanting to plant sunflowers." A soft smile tugged at the corner of Evelyn's mouth, small but real. "I'd like that." Maisie beamed, satisfied. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving behind only the faint scent of rain and the sound of the wind settling. Jonas leaned back, watching as Evelyn tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes reflecting something he hadn't seen before. Not quite peace, but maybe the first seed of it. The air buzzed with the kind of excitement only small-town festivals could conjure, a mingling of fried dough, laughter, and the faint sound of fiddles. Banners stretched across Main Street, fluttering in the breeze, and stalls brimmed with homemade pies, quilted crafts, and jars of honey glinting in the sun. Jonas hadn't planned to go this year. He usually avoided crowds, the cheerful noise amplifying the quiet in his chest since his wife passed. But Maisie had begged, her eyes shining, and Evelyn, after some coaxing, had quietly agreed to come along. Now, weaving through the throng, Jonas watched Evelyn out of the corner of his eye. She walked beside Maisie, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets, her eyes absorbing everything yet holding something back. She wore that same quiet reserve, like someone always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maisie tugged at her hand. "Come on, Miss Evelyn, let's see the pumpkins." Evelyn let out a soft laugh and followed, though Jonas noticed how her gaze flickered to the edges of the crowd, scanning like a bird always half ready to take flight. They wandered past booths selling handmade soaps, jam preserves, and weathered farmers tipping their hats. The town square felt alive, but still familiar in a way that softened something inside Jonas. Maisie raced ahead, dashing toward the hayrides. Jonas hung back, matching Evelyn's quieter pace. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Just a lot of people." Jonas didn't press further. He understood that sometimes too many voices crowded out the ones inside your own head. As they approached the pumpkin stand, Jonas exchanged greetings with some of the older townsfolk, many of whom had known him his whole life. They nodded politely to Evelyn, though she kept her eyes down, deflecting questions with simple answers. It was then, as Maisie admired a lopsided jack-o'-lantern, that an older man shuffled up beside Jonas, Eldon Grady, the town's resident. Historian and keeper of everyone's secrets, he tipped his weathered cap, squinting at Evelyn. "Well now," Eldon drawled, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Ain't seen you around before, miss?" Evelyn stiffened slightly, but gave a polite nod. "Just passing through." Eldon's eyes narrowed, curiosity peaked. "Funny, you got a look about you, like someone I met years back." He chuckled lightly. "Maybe it's just these old eyes playing tricks." Jonas watched Evelyn closely. Her smile barely held as she glanced down, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. Maisie returned oblivious, holding up a small pumpkin. "Miss Evelyn, can we carve this one?" Evelyn quickly nodded, her attention snapping back to Maisie like a lifeline. Jonas thanked Eldon and steered them away from the growing crowd, sensing the undercurrent that had unsettled Evelyn. They found a quiet bench at the edge of the square, shaded beneath a canopy of oak trees. The music from the fiddle players floated faintly on the breeze, distant enough to offer breathing room. Maisie danced ahead, chasing leaves, leaving Jonas and Evelyn in companionable silence. After a while, Jonas spoke low, not looking directly at her. "You okay?" Evelyn's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her jacket. "It's nothing." He waited. Finally, she let out a quiet breath. "It's strange, being around people who don't expect anything from me." Jonas glanced at her then. "That's strange, huh?" She gave a soft laugh, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Stranger than you'd think." She didn't elaborate, but Jonas felt something shift, like a door cracking open, revealing shadows she wasn't ready to name. After a few moments, she cleared her throat. "Maisie seems happy." Jonas smiled faintly. "She is. She's got a knack for finding the light in things." Evelyn's gaze lingered on Maisie, her voice softer. "You're lucky." Jonas studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the way her shoulders carried invisible weight. "Luck's got less to do with it than choice," he said quietly. "Took me a while to see that." She looked at him then, eyes searching, something unspoken caught between them. Before either could say more, Maisie bounded back, tugging them toward the cider stand. As the afternoon wore on, the three of them walked the festival together, sharing caramel apples, watching sack races, even daring a few turns on the old carousel. And while Evelyn laughed politely, smiled when Maisie chattered, Jonas couldn't help noticing how often her gaze drifted toward the outskirts, toward the road stretching beyond town. By evening, they returned to the farm, arms full of small festival prizes and sun-tired smiles. But as Jonas stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling. Eldon's words echoed faintly. You got a look about you. And Jonas couldn't help wondering, what story was Evelyn still running from? The sky that morning was off, too still, too heavy. Even the birds seemed quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Jonas Whitaker stood on the porch, his gaze fixed on the horizon where bruised clouds had begun stacking thick and low. Weather was a part of life out here. Droughts, downpours, hail. He'd learned long ago to respect the sky, to read its signs like scripture. And today, the air had that weight, the kind that clung to your skin and made the hair on your arms stand up. Evelyn stepped outside, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She followed his gaze, her brow furrowing slightly. "Is it coming soon?" she asked quietly. Jonas nodded. "Looks like a bad one." He could feel it deep in his bones, the kind of storm that didn't just rattle windows, but cracked through whatever you thought was sturdy. Maisie's voice called from inside, excited about something she was drawing. Jonas gave Evelyn a glance, the unspoken message clear. They needed to get things tied down. Together they moved quickly, securing loose tools, covering feed, closing up the barn doors. Evelyn worked without complaint, her movements sure, her eyes sharp. It was a quiet kind of teamwork, efficient and almost instinctual, as though she'd been part of this life longer than the past few weeks. As they worked, the wind began to rise, sharp and restless. The trees bent, groaning under the mounting pressure. Jonas grabbed a tarp, struggling to secure it over a stack of hay when the wind caught it hard, nearly knocking him off balance. "Let me!" Evelyn shouted over the gusts, rushing to help him. Together they fought the tarp down, Evelyn's hands steady even as the wind howled around them. By the time they'd secured the last latch, the first fat drops of rain had begun to fall. Heavy, insistent. They raced back toward the house, just as thunder rolled low and deep across the fields. Inside, Maisie had lit every candle she could find, her small form curled up on the couch with her stuffed rabbit. She looked up as they entered, eyes wide. "Is it bad?" she asked. Jonas gave her a reassuring smile, brushing wet hair from her forehead. "Nothing we haven't weathered before." He caught Evelyn's glance then, something in her expression tight, distant, but she said nothing. As night fell, the storm settled in like an uninvited guest, battering the windows and shaking the rafters. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Jonas grabbed the lanterns, lighting them carefully. Evelyn busied herself in the kitchen, finding extra blankets, moving without needing to be asked. But as the wind howled louder, Jonas noticed the barn door through the window. Its latch had come loose again, the door banging wildly. He grabbed his coat, heading for the door. "I'll get it," he called over his shoulder. Evelyn stood abruptly. "Wait, I'll help." Jonas hesitated, but she was already pulling on her jacket. Outside, the rain sliced sideways, blinding and cold. They fought their way to the barn, the mud slick beneath their boots. Jonas reached for the latch, but a sudden gust sent the door crashing back, the corner striking his shoulder hard. He staggered, cursing under his breath. "Jonas!" Evelyn caught his arm, steadying him. He shook his head, wincing. "It's fine, just need to—" But she moved quickly, taking charge. "Hold still." Ignoring the rain, she pulled the latch, working the knot with fingers surprisingly nimble. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face, focused, determined. Finally, the door secured, she turned. Back to him, water dripping down her cheeks. "You're soaked," she said, her voice tight but calm. "Come on!" Back inside, Maisie met them with a worried look. Jonas waved her off, but Evelyn didn't. She guided him gently to a chair, inspecting his shoulder. "It's not broken," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Then, without hesitation, she retrieved the first aid kit, her touch steady as she wrapped his arm. Jonas watched her, something unspoken settling between them. "You didn't have to do all that," he said quietly, after a while. Evelyn's eyes flicked up. To meet his For a moment neither spoke, the storm still raging outside, but the space between them suddenly calm. "I don't run every time things get rough," she replied softly. Her words hung there, heavier than the rain, before she stood, wiping her hands. Jonas caught her wrist lightly. "I know." She lingered a second longer, eyes searching his face, before stepping away. Maisie climbed into his lap then, curling against him, safe and warm despite the world outside. Jonas glanced out the window at the battered fields, the rain still pounding. But inside, something felt steadier. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, they were all still standing. The storm left behind a battered quiet, the kind that lingers long after the winds have passed, pressing down like something unfinished. Jonas stood outside the barn, his shoulders sore but manageable, surveying the damage. Fallen branches, muddy ruts, a few fence posts leaning drunkenly after the night's fury. Nothing they couldn't fix. But the real heaviness sat somewhere deeper, harder to name. Evelyn was already working, sleeves rolled up, helping Maisie clear debris from the yard. Jonas couldn't help but notice how natural she'd become out here, how her movements no longer felt like a stranger learning the steps, but someone who belonged. And yet, something about last night lingered, the way she'd taken charge, calm under pressure, the flash of something in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Strength, yes, but also a kind of weariness. By noon, Eldon Grady's old pickup rumbled up the dirt road, kicking up dust as it approached. Jonas wiped his hands, offering a polite nod as the elderly man climbed out, moving slower these days, but sharp as ever. "Thought I'd stop by," Eldon said casually, glancing around the yard. "Storm treat you all right?" Jonas gestured too. "The field could have been worse." Eldon's eyes flickered toward Evelyn, who stood a few yards away, coaxing Maisie to stack fallen branches. He squinted slightly, thoughtful. "She's been helping you out?" Eldon asked, voice mild. Jonas hesitated, knowing better than to dodge. "Yeah, she's been good to have around." Eldon nodded, then leaned in a little closer. "Jonas, something about her rings familiar." Jonas glanced sideways, quiet. "How so?" The old man scratched his chin, eyes never leaving Evelyn's figure. "Years back I did some business with Charles Marlowe. You know, big landowner south of here. His wife used to bring their daughter to these parts sometimes, visiting kin. Pretty little thing, always quiet but sharp." Eldon's gaze narrowed. "Can't help but notice. She favors that family." Jonas felt something tighten in his chest, but he kept his voice even. "Maybe just coincidence." Eldon gave a slow nod, but didn't push. "Maybe." He clapped Jonas's good shoulder gently. "Storms bring more than broken fences sometimes. You watch out for yourself." With that, Eldon ambled back to his truck, leaving Jonas standing there, dust swirling faintly in the still air. That evening, after Maisie had fallen asleep, curled up with her favorite book, Jonas found Evelyn outside, near the apple tree. The wind had settled, the sky clear now, stars scattered wide like a field of pinpricks. She stood with her arms crossed, eyes lifted toward the night, her face unreadable. He approached quietly, stopping a few feet away. For a while, they didn't speak. Finally, he broke the silence. "Eldon stopped by today." Evelyn's posture stiffened slightly, but she didn't turn. "Said you reminded him of someone," Jonas continued, voice gentle. "Charles Marlowe's daughter." A long pause stretched between them, heavy and fragile. When Evelyn spoke, her voice was low, almost tired. "I figured someone would recognize me eventually." She finally looked at him, and in her eyes, Jonas saw the flicker of something deeper. Exhaustion, resignation, maybe even shame. "So it's true," he said quietly. She nodded once, barely perceptible. "My name's Evelyn Marlowe." Jonas absorbed the confession, the weight of it settling like dust. He'd known the Marlowe name, of course. Anyone in these parts did. wealth, influence, land deals. But what mattered more in this moment wasn't her lineage, but the way she stood there now, vulnerable, waiting for whatever came next. I left all that, Evelyn added after a moment, voice steadier but strained. After my mother passed, it felt like everything back there was built on expectations. Who I should marry, what role I should play. I couldn't breathe. She looked down, fingers fidgeting with her sleeve. I thought if I disappeared, maybe I could finally figure out who I really am. Jonas took a breath, the pieces falling into place. The guarded glances, the restless nights, the way she worked so hard to blend in. You didn't owe me the truth, he said softly. She blinked, surprised, but he continued, meeting her gaze. I'm glad you trusted me enough to tell it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet wrapped around them, something tentative but solid. Finally, Evelyn let out a breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. So, what now? Jonas gave a small smile. Tomorrow the fences still need mending, the soil still needs turning. He paused. Doesn't change much for me. Her eyes shimmered faintly under the starlight, something soft and unsure. Flickering in them, Jonas tipped his hat back. You've been running a long time. Maybe it's all right to stay put for a while. Evelyn swallowed hard, nodding, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. The wind rustled gently through the orchard, leaves whispering like a promise, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt like running. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp soil and wood smoke. Evelyn stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, washing the last of the breakfast dishes. Through the window, she watched Maisie chasing a stray chicken across the yard, her laughter echoing against the barn. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt a fragile sense of calm. The confession to Jonas last night had been terrifying, but freeing. She hadn't expected him to take it so quietly, without judgment, without stepping back. It had left her more unsteady than rejection would have. She was still mulling it over when the sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled her attention. A sleek black car, a jarring contrast to the dust-covered trucks usually seen around here, rolled up the dirt drive. The vehicle's polished shine glinted sharply in the morning sun, as out of place on this land as a silver spoon in a barn. Evelyn's heart sank. She wiped her hands quickly and stepped onto the porch, just as a tall, well-dressed man emerged. From the car, his dark suit was impeccable, his expression cool and businesslike. "Miss Marlowe," he greeted, voice smooth. "I've been looking for you." Jonas appeared from around the side of the house, wiping his hands on a rag, his gaze narrowing. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat suddenly tight. "What are you doing here, Douglas?" Douglas Blackwell, her father's longtime advisor, lawyer, a fixer. Whatever title suited the task, always polite, always composed, always the messenger. "Your father is concerned," Douglas said evenly. "There have been complications since your departure. Family matters, business matters. He'd like you to come home." Evelyn crossed her arms, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I've told him before. I want no part of any of it." Douglas's eyes flickered toward Jonas, then back to her. "You know it's not that simple." Jonas remained silent, but Evelyn felt his presence beside her, solid and steady. Douglas took a measured step forward. "There are decisions being made. Your absence complicates things. Your inheritance, your role within the family." "I walked away from all of that," she cut in, her voice sharp. For a moment something flickered across Douglas's face. Frustration, maybe pity, but it disappeared quickly. "This isn't just about you. You've been gone long enough. Your father wants you back before certain matters become finalized." Evelyn's chest tightened. She knew exactly what that meant. Arranged partnerships, legal documents, binding contracts, all designed to lock her into a life she never wanted. Jonas spoke then, quiet but firm. She's free to decide where she belongs. Douglas's gaze settled on Jonas, assessing, impassive. This isn't personal, it's family business. He handed Evelyn a small envelope. Think it over. I'll be in town for a few days. Without waiting for a reply, Douglas turned, climbing back into the car. The engine purred, the tires spitting gravel as he drove away, leaving behind only a faint scent of cologne and something colder. Evelyn stood frozen on the porch, the envelope heavy in her hand. Jonas watched her carefully. "You all right?" She nodded stiffly, though everything inside her churned. He didn't press. Instead, he leaned against the railing, voice calm. "Doesn't seem like he's used to hearing no." That tugged a laugh from her, a hollow one. "He's not." Maisie's laughter echoed from the yard, blissfully unaware of the tension. Evelyn stared at the envelope, her fingers tightening. "They don't care who I've become out here. To them, I'm a name on paperwork, a piece in their game." Jonas met her gaze steadily. "So, what do you want?" It was such a simple question, but the hardest one. She looked down, swallowing. The lump in her throat. "I want to be the person I am here, not the one they've decided I should be." Jonas nodded once, as if that answer was enough, but Evelyn knew it wouldn't be enough for her father. That night, after Maisie had been tucked into bed, Evelyn sat outside on the porch steps, the cool air biting at her skin. The envelope lay, unopened, beside her. Jonas joined her after a while, lowering himself onto the steps without a word. They sat in silence, the darkness stretching around them like a blanket. The stars blinked overhead, the sound of crickets filling the void. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice quiet. "He won't stop. My father. He'll keep sending people until I give in." Jonas's voice was steady. "What happens if you go back?" She drew in a shaky breath. "I lose myself, everything I've found here." Jonas looked at her, his gaze soft but certain. "Then don't." She glanced at him, something fragile flickering in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep fighting them," she admitted. Jonas's reply was simple. "You're stronger than you think." The words settled deep, warmer than she expected. For a long moment they simply sat together, the quiet stretching between them, not uncomfortable, but weighty with something real. Evelyn looked down at the envelope once more. Then, without hesitation, she stood, walked over to the fire pit and tossed it in. The flames licked at the paper, curling its edges until it crumbled into ash. Jonas didn't say anything, but the faint smile at the corner of his mouth said enough. Tomorrow there'd be more to face, but tonight she'd made her choice. The days after Douglas Blackwell's visit settled into an uneasy stillness, like the calm after a storm, but with the sense something had yet to fully break. Jonas found himself moving through familiar routines, mending the fence, checking the soil, feeding the livestock. The work was grounding, but his mind drifted more than usual. Evelyn stayed busy too, but he noticed how she lingered less in the quiet moments, how her gaze sometimes drifted toward the road, shoulders tense. It wasn't that she was distant, if anything. She worked harder, smiled when Maisie tugged at her hand, laughed when the chickens scattered, but something had shifted. Jonas felt it. He didn't press. He'd never been one to push. People came to reckonings in their own time. Still, the question sat heavy in his chest. Would she stay, or would the weight of everything she left behind pull her back? One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting long shadows across the field, Jonas sat on the porch, sharpening a dull blade. His shoulder ached faintly, a reminder of the storm. Maisie appeared beside him, settling down cross-legged, her little brow furrowed. "Daddy," she asked after a moment, "is Miss Evelyn going to leave?" Jonas glanced at her, surprised by the bluntness. Maisie rarely said things outright, but children had a way of cutting through to the heart of what adults skirted around. He exhaled slowly, wiping the blade. "I don't know. Maisie fiddled with the edge of her shoe, thoughtful. I don't want her to. Jonas swallowed, his gaze drifting toward the barn where Evelyn worked, stacking feed quietly out of sight. She's got things she's figuring out, he said gently. Maisie looked up, her eyes solemn in the fading light. Maybe she just needs to know it's okay to stay. The words caught Jonas off guard, simple yet profound, out of the mouths of children. That evening, Evelyn didn't join them for supper. She'd claimed she wasn't hungry, retreating to the barn to finish some tasks. Jonas watched the empty chair across from him, Maisie unusually quiet as she poked at her food. Afterward, once Maisie had gone to bed, Jonas stepped outside. The night air was cool, the stars sharp in the dark sky. He walked toward the barn without thinking, boots crunching softly over the gravel. Inside, Evelyn stood near the back, brushing down one of the horses, her movements slow and methodical. She glanced up as he approached, offering a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Couldn't sleep? Jonas asked quietly. She shrugged, focusing on the horse's mane. Too much on my mind. Jonas leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. He waited, giving her space to speak if she wanted. After a long pause, she finally stopped, resting her hand gently on the horse's flank. I keep thinking, maybe I've just been selfish, she said softly. Walking away from my family, from the life they built. Jonas shook his head. You're not selfish for wanting something different, Evelyn swallowed hard. But running only lasts so long. He watched her carefully. You didn't run from here. Her eyes flicked. Up something raw flickering behind them. Jonas took a step closer, his voice quiet but steady. You've built something here, Evelyn. Maybe not the life your family planned, but something real. For Maisie. For me. For yourself. He let the silence hang, giving the weight of the words space to settle. Then, after a beat, he added, and if you're worried about belonging, you already do. Her breath hitched slightly, her fingers curling at her sides. She opened her mouth as if to reply, but instead, her gaze dropped to the floor, shoulders tense. Jonas didn't push further. He simply stepped back toward the door, pausing only once. When you're ready, he said gently, you'll know where home is. He left her standing there, the barn quiet, except for the soft breath of the horses. Later that night, as Jonas tucked Maisie into bed, she peeked up at him sleepily. Did you tell her? Maisie asked drowsily. Jonas smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Sometimes, Maisie, people need to find their own answers. She nodded, eyes fluttering closed. But even after Maisie drifted off, Jonas lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady hum of night sounds outside. He didn't know what Evelyn would choose, but what he did know, what had become clear in recent days, was that the best things in life weren't forced, they were offered, and sometimes all you could do was leave the gate open and wait. The sky over the fields was a pale, cloudless blue, the kind of morning that felt stretched thin and fragile. Jonas stood by the porch, coffee cooling in his hands, watching the sun creep slowly over the horizon. But something felt off. The barn. Doctor was latched. The kitchen quiet. No soft footfalls of Evelyn moving through morning chores, no quick glance from her across the yard, sleeves rolled, hair tied back. Gone. He'd known, deep down, even before Maisie padded out onto the porch, and asked in her small, hopeful voice, "Daddy, where's Miss Evelyn?" Jonas didn't have an answer. That afternoon he went about the day's work, mending, cleaning, tending. His body moved out of habit, but his mind churned. By sunset, it became clear that the silence she left behind was louder than he wanted. To admit, Eldon stopped by briefly, commenting on the weather, tossing glances toward the empty barn. Jonas said little, but something Eldon muttered as he climbed back into his truck stuck with him. Sometimes you gotta go after the things worth keeping. That night, after Maisie had gone to bed, Jonas sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chipped coffee cup between his hands. He didn't want to overstep. He didn't want to trap Evelyn back in the life she'd fought to leave. But maybe there was a difference between chasing and standing beside someone when they needed it most. Finally, he stood, grabbed his coat, and slipped out into the quiet night. The town wasn't far, but Jonas's truck felt heavier than usual as he drove down the empty roads. Lights blurred past, neon signs flickering. He parked outside the town's small, polished inn, the kind of place visitors passed through when they didn't plan on staying long. The desk clerk nodded toward the lounge when Jonas asked if a Mr. Blackwell was still in town. Sure enough, Douglas Blackwell sat neatly in the corner, nursing a glass of scotch, his tailored suit untouched by dust or fatigue. He looked up, faint surprise flickering across his face as Jonas approached. "Mr. Whitaker," Douglas greeted smoothly, setting his glass down. "Didn't expect to see you here." Jonas remained standing, arms crossed. "I came for Evelyn." Douglas's polite mask didn't falter. "She left of her own accord," Jonas nodded once. "Maybe, but I'm not here to talk about what she owes you." Douglas's smile thinned slightly. "This isn't personal, Mr. Whitaker. It's family business, responsibilities, legacy." Jonas leaned forward, voice calm but unwavering. "What's a legacy worth if it crushes the people carrying it?" Douglas studied him, calculating, as if reassessing the farmer standing before him. "She's not some obligation to be shuffled back into line," Jonas continued. "She's found a place where she's more than a name on paper." There was a pause, a quiet tension hanging heavy between them. Finally, Douglas spoke, cool as ever. "Miss Marlowe has duties she cannot simply abandon." Jonas shook his head. "Maybe you see it that way, but you don't get to decide who she is." Without waiting for a reply, Jonas turned, leaving Douglas's measured silence behind him. He found Evelyn at the train station. She stood alone on the platform, a small suitcase at her feet, coat buttoned tight against the breeze. Her posture was straight, composed, but her eyes, when she saw Jonas, flickered with something more fragile. Neither spoke immediately. Jonas stopped a few feet away, the weight of everything between them settling in the cool night air. "Didn't think you'd come," she said softly, voice almost lost beneath the distant hum of the tracks. He met her gaze. "Didn't think I'd let you leave without saying this." She swallowed, her hands tightening around the strap of her bag. "You don't owe them your life," Jonas said simply. "And you don't owe me anything either." He took a breath, steady. "But whatever choice you make, I want you to know there's a place for you, not because of who your family is, but because of who you've become." For a moment, Evelyn stood still, eyes shimmering, the weight of years pressing down. Then quietly she shook her head. "I've spent so long letting everyone else decide who I should be." She looked up at him, something breaking open in her voice. "But here's the truth, Jonas. I don't want to keep running, and I don't want to go back." Her words hung there, trembling. Jonas stepped closer, his voice low but sure. "Then stay." She let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "Are you sure?" she whispered, half afraid of the answer. He gave her a small, quiet smile, the kind that said more than words ever could. "Yeah," he said simply. "I'm sure." The distant whistle of the train sounded, but neither of them moved. They didn't need to. Later, as they drove back down the winding country road, the lights of the town fading behind them, Jonas glanced over at Evelyn, her face soft in the glow of the dashboard. For the first time in a long while, she looked like someone who'd finally found her way home. Spring arrived quietly on the heels of a long winter, coaxing green shoots from the soil and scattering wildflowers across the edges of the fields. The apple tree by the old farmhouse stood taller this year, its branches thick with white blossoms, swaying gently in the breeze. Jonas Whitaker stood beneath it, hands in his pockets, the scent of fresh earth and blooming petals filling the air. He glanced toward the porch where Maisie and Evelyn knelt together, arranging seed packets and marking small rows in the planter boxes. Their laughter drifted across the yard, light and easy, the kind that comes from people who no longer feel the need to keep their guard up. It had been months since that night at the train station. Months since Evelyn chose to stay, not out of obligation, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to, and in that time, life had settled into a rhythm both familiar and new. Evelyn had taken to the farm as if it had always been part of her, learning the names of neighbors, patching the roof with Jonas, baking pies with Maisie. There were still letters from her father occasionally, brief, formal, but she no longer flinched when they arrived. Sometimes she didn't open them at all. Instead, she focused on the life she was building here, her life. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the yard as Jonas wiped his hands on a rag and approached the porch. Evelyn looked up, her smile soft but sure. Maisie jumped up, running toward him. "Daddy! Look, we're planting sunflowers again!" Jonas ruffled her hair, glancing at the neat rows they'd marked. "Looks like you've got a good system." Evelyn stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Maisie's the boss. I'm just following orders." Jonas chuckled, but his gaze lingered on Evelyn a moment longer. There was something steady about her, now something grounded, like roots that had finally found solid earth. "Eldon dropped by earlier," he mentioned casually, nodding toward the road. "Said the town council wants volunteers for the spring festival." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Thinking of signing up," he shrugged. "Thought we might all go together." Her smile widened, but before she could answer, Maisie tugged at her hand. "Come on, Miss Evelyn, let's plant more before dinner." Jonas watched them disappear around the side of the house, a quiet warmth blooming in his chest. That evening, after supper, they sat on the porch, the night air cool but pleasant. Fireflies danced in the distance, the sky painted in deep blues and purples. Maisie curled up with her book, half listening as Jonas and Evelyn talked softly, their conversation drifting easily between farm chores and town gossip. After a while, Evelyn fell quiet, her gaze focused on the horizon. Jonas glanced at her, waiting. She spoke without looking at him, her voice low. "Do you ever wonder how life can change so much without you realizing it?" Jonas considered the question, then nodded. "Every day." She smiled faintly. "I used to think I had to follow a path someone else set, that stepping off it meant failing." Her fingers traced the edge of her mug thoughtfully. "But here, I learned something different." He tilted his head. "What's that?" She looked at him then, eyes soft but shining. "That sometimes the life you build yourself, one step at a time, is worth more than anything handed to you." Jonas felt the truth of it settle deep, like a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying, lifting just a little. The porch creaked gently beneath them, the sounds of night wrapping around the house like a lullaby. After a moment, Evelyn added almost shyly, "And that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stands beside you when it matters." Jonas's gaze met hers, steady and certain. "You belong here," he said simply. Her smile widened, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes. Maisie glanced up then, yawning, her small voice breaking the quiet. "Daddy, are the sunflowers gonna grow tall this year?" Jonas chuckled, pulling her close. "If we take care of them, they will." Evelyn watched them, her heart full, the heaviness she'd carried for so long, now replaced by something lighter, something real. She stood, stretching. "I think we'll have the best sunflowers yet." Weeks later, as the first sunflowers peeked over the fence line, the town's spring festival bloomed to life. Colorful banners, laughter in the streets, neighbors greeting one another like old friends. Jonas, Evelyn, and Maisie walked through. The crowd together, arms linked, the weight of past expectations left far behind. People waved, offered baked goods, patted Jonas on the back. Eldon tipped his hat, winking knowingly at Evelyn. She smiled, no longer feeling the need to hide. That evening, as lanterns flickered to life and music filled the air, Jonas found himself watching Evelyn across the square, her laughter easy, her posture relaxed, as if she'd finally let herself belong. And in that moment, under the warm glow of the festival lights, he realized something. The harvest wasn't just in the fields, it was in second chances, in forgiveness, in the quiet, powerful decision to stay when running felt easier. And as the night wrapped around them, full of light and laughter, he knew one thing for certain: this was home, for all of them. And now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Are you from a small town, a big city, or maybe somewhere in between? Share your thoughts in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where our community is tuning in from and what part of the story touched you the most. And if you'd like to hear more heartfelt stories about love, kindness, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's the simplest way to make sure you never miss a tale that might just brighten your day. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and remember, sometimes it's the quietest choices that change everything.